the world's pretty crazy these days. There's a lot going on. There's a lot that's happened over the last 4 or 5 years in terms of events that we faced at the companies I was with. But there was the Ever Given thing where inventory was tied up by the Suez Canal being blocked. There's the Port of LA strikes that blocked massive amounts of inventory going through North America. Like those are, I think, when you start a D2C business and you're buying from around the world, if your suppliers are in countries around the world, which is changing a lot these days, you had to get really knowledgeable about world events really quickly.
I know, my God. Sometimes I feel so bad for the founders and all these things that happen that you never could have imagined, like the Suez Canal thing.
Yeah, and that's really around where you're getting to of you want to have 3 to 6 months of inventory on hand. And what you want to do is be constantly checking, what's my turnover of inventory rate? How many units do I have on today? How many did I sell last month? That gives you your turnover ratio of inventory. That's something you want to have 3 to 6 months on hand. For some small businesses, they're constrained by how long it takes for their inventory to get to them. Maybe it takes 2 months to put the inventory on a boat from China and get it over to the UK, and your supplier will only make so many units of it at a time. You can only order a year's worth of inventory at a time, and that's inherently just a really risky business to be in. Something to think about is, unless you're a really well-capitalized business, that might not be a product that you want to get into until, you're profitable and have cash on hand, or you have debt facilities that will allow you to fund that inventory purchase and spread those repayments over a long term or in the future. So all of this sounds super complicated because it is.
It is super complicated. And also some of it comes down to personal preference and access to capital. So talking about risk, what do you say, or what do you think when founders, and there'll be some people probably watching this now who would think who would absolutely be taking the strategy of, we're growing fast, we don't mind losing money. And there'll be other people who are watching this who will say, we would never want to grow fast at the cost of losing money. Some of that is personal preference and appetite for risk, isn't it? It's not necessarily right or wrong. How do you answer questions like that? And what do you say to founders when they say those sorts of things?
I think a lot of founders, like you said, you have to be risk loving to a degree. You have to take risks to grow a business. It's kind of the nature of the beast. But I think sometimes you need to take a step back and put all the pieces together in a simplified way, though. Think about it logically and say, okay, am I losing money to acquire customers because I think I'm growing really quickly and I know they're going to come back and buy from me a lot? So that's one piece of information in itself. And then you say, okay, I've got a really great relationship with my supplier. I can order a month's worth of inventory at a time and it'll be in my warehouse in a week, and I've got 30-day payment terms there. That's another kind of piece of information about your supply chain that you put together. And you say, okay, I don't have to order too much. If I say, get my customer acquisition wrong and maybe people don't show up the way I thought they were going to repeatedly, that means I don't have to order more inventory and I'm not putting myself in a hole where I'm acquiring customers unprofitably. I've bought a whole bunch of inventory to sell to them that I know I'm not going to sell now.
And then you're in a downward spiral.
And then you're in a doom spiral, essentially.
Yeah.
So I think it's about really putting together the pieces of your business all together. That is what you need to do, is you need to take a look at it, take a step back, put it down on paper, understand what your whole kind of supply chain through customer acquisition journey looks like, and say to yourself, does this make sense? Is this going to work out? And it's a complicated question, but unless you can answer that, you're not really you're at risk of not being in control of your business for sure. I think so depending how much risk you want to take, which is again a personal preference, I would say look at your supply chain, look at your situation, and are you set up to grow really aggressively? Or do you have super long lead times? Do you have to order a year's worth of stock at a time that's going to take an extra 2 months to get to you? So that means you need to go put a huge amount of cash out into the world and wait a long time for it to come back to you. You want to be really certain that you're going to sell that. That's not a situation where you should be acquiring customers unprofitably and spending a ton on marketing, burning cash from a P&L perspective, because
just increasing your risk of a doom spiral, essentially.
You're increasing your risk of a doom spiral, essentially, yeah.
Brands say to me all the time about you, what does Ian think? What does Ian say is good? And I'm sure they ask you the same question, don't they? What's good? So they say, what does Ian say about this metric or that metric? And can you ask Ian what this metric should look like. And I'm always like, I can ask it, and yes, of course, but they're all different scenarios, aren't they? With, as we've covered today, a huge number of moving parts.
Yeah.
What metrics do you think people should be focusing on? And can you tell them what's good?
I think
3 months to turn around stock is a clear metric that's good, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you want to hold 3 to 6 months of any given SKU on hand. And if you're constrained around things that don't allow that to happen, then you want to be really certain that you're going to sell it, or perhaps you don't have, maybe you're pretty thinly capitalized, you don't have a bunch of cash in the bank. I think you probably want to think about foregoing that opportunity. I think in terms of overall P&L management, it's a number that I like to kind of stick by, and as something I've talked to VCs in board meetings when they are inputting their view into budgets. People are talking about you don't really want to spend more than 30% of your revenue in total on sales and marketing. That's, look at a P&L, you've got your revenue, you've got your gross margin. The kind of word in D2C is that you want to have at least a 60% margin, and that's your gross profit margin. So that's after.
And do you think that's good?
I think it's manageable. Yeah, I think
it's not great, is it?
I think 60 is good. Yeah.
Okay.
Again, then it gets complicated because you split it down into channels, and there's probably different benchmarks for different channels.
Yeah.
I think a 60% gross profit margin in a wholesale channel is really difficult to maintain. But for D2C specifically, you definitely want 60%.
Yeah, or higher.
Or higher. And why is that? Because it's going to cost you at least probably 5 or 10% to ship it to a customer. Your product cost should be anywhere from 10 to 20%. And then you're going to have some returns and discounts and other things that kind of hammer that margin. But if you set yourself a benchmark of 60%, that leaves you a lot of headroom to do the other things your business needs to do.